Well, hey everyone, this is the Lowercase B podcast. Thanks for joining us today. Today I had the pleasure of chatting with Tanay Kothari, the CEO and co-founder of Wispr AI. Tanay, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here. Yeah. This is fantastic.
Thanks, man. When we were chatting last night, one of the things you were talking about is you're trying to build magic. Mm-hmm. What does magic look like to you in software?
Magic looks like it's the spark you see in somebody's eyes. Mm-hmm. It's the slight smile that comes up when they're interacting with something that you've built. And there's one time when I was young with one of the first things that I'd built, which was a voice assistant. This is back in 2010. I remember seeing that expression on people's faces when they used it for the first time. And I think I've never wanted anything else ever since then.
Yeah. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
Yeah.
I had that moment when I used Wispr Flow, and that was one of the reasons again why I reached out to you, because it seemed like from the outset you knew what you wanted to build.
Yeah.
And you did a really good job of getting whatever you let out to regular users, which is what I got my hands on, was really good. How did you kind of understand the need for attention to detail in that first version of Wispr Flow?
I think part of it just comes from me personally having an extremely high bar for what I consider to be good. And so for the team inside the company, what that looks like is we just keep iterating and pushing the envelope until we get to some point where we say, this is good enough for the world. And at that point, it's something that creates the delight that feels so natural. And a lot of it comes from, so I have a deep background in design as well, like
you could tell
over the years. And it started off because I was building apps in high school. And most of my friends who I would build this with used to get busy with exams and tests and all of that, and they would just go MIA. So I was like, okay, I kind of need to take care of this thing myself because otherwise I get blocked very often. So I taught myself design, and the more I taught myself, the more I started noticing the little details that other people put into their softwares. And it started to matter till a point where if somebody did something slightly wrong, it was very noticeable.
Yeah.
Everything from a notification lingering for a second too long, a sound that wasn't perfectly timed when the action happened, a software that just made you feel a little off. And that all built up. Never thought these two, like the design and the programming side of it, would come this closely together, but it did in a way with Wispr that looking back, it makes sense, but they were just two separate tangents.
I think that design is incredibly underrated, both in software and in hardware. If you look at companies like Apple, what are they fantastic at? They make hardware that's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's just beautiful. And you don't even need to understand what beauty is, but you know you want it in your hand. It's that magneticism that gets you to come back and want to use it more. And I feel the same thing with Wispr Flow. Like when I use it, I just feel like this is the natural thing to do. I want to do it more and more. Mm-hmm. But what that kind of does, like for me, is it builds a bit of a dependence on that tool. What do you think about people becoming super dependent on when you think about someone becoming very dependent on your tool, you also inherit with that a lot of responsibility to maintain their trust. Could you talk a bit about the trust of your users and how you kind of embed that in the team and help them understand why you're building what you're building and why it's so important to maintain user trust?
Yeah, I think this is something that I probably repeat to every new person who's joining and probably the entire team every single week about the fact that there are a lot of people for whom 90% of everything that they do on their computers is with Wispr. Mm-hmm. And this is a tool that is fundamentally driving a massive part of their life. And what that means is we can't fuck up. Like we have to maintain that really high bar for reliability, really high bar for user privacy, really high bar for the experience that we keep delivering to them. Because a really small thing like a hidden latency, losing something that somebody said creates such a big impact in them. And so inside the team, every single person is talking to our users on a weekly basis. I personally talk to 50 or 60 users every single week. And I want to talk to them and I want to understand the pain that they feel. I think one of the PMs at Linear had a really good way to describe it, where you keep asking the user question until the point you feel the level of pain that they do with the feature or the issue. And if you can build that across your team, then it gets to that level of empathy where you really understand the gravity of what you built.
But you've picked an incredibly hard problem. In fact, we talked about earlier, you're trying to convince users to break up with their keyboard.
Yeah.
A keyboard is a staple. And by definition, it's an interface that you have to have in order to get the maximum use out of your computer, out of most computing environments, your mobile phone and things like that. Why pick such a hard problem?
I would say in some ways it's the hardest, and also in some ways it's the easiest. And the reason I say that is what we want to do is fundamentally change human behavior. Like, my personal philosophy is life is short. You could spend it building random apps and games, or build something truly transformational. And even if building something that actually replaces the keyboard has a very low probability of success, that's something worth doing, because that's something I can, be 40, be talking to my kids and be proud of. Like, I tried to solve this really hard problem, and whether it succeeded or failed doesn't matter at that point. But we made some big shots. So that's the origin of like why I think this is one of the most important problems to me, and we decided to tackle it anyway, knowing how hard it was. Now, the reason why it's easy is the insight I had about building engaging software is it's all about building habits at the end of the day. Everything else that you hear about trying to gamify it and so on are substitutes for building true habits and truly fitting into people's workflows, where you don't need any of that to draw people in. And if you build a software, or if you build any tool that people use that does one thing that people do 100 times a day, is way more impactful than a software that can do 100 things that people use once a day, which is what more so a Siri, for example, looks and feels like. Because if you build this thing, you build this habit, and then you have a user for life. And that makes it easy to scale more, to give them more, to kind of maintain and retain those users. And as a business and product, it's just way more valuable to build software that way, especially if you're hitting at that interface level.
When you have a user that's really beginning to embrace Flow, Wispr Flow, and they start getting a lot of value out of it, what do you see like in their data? What does a user who's kind of lifting off look like to you and your team internally? So I look at a user's product journey with Wispr Flow it has 3 aha moments, which is what we define their stage by. The first aha moment comes when they first are onboarding onto the product. We've designed this to happen within the first 30 seconds, which is your first dictation. You say it, you see it appear immediately, and it's perfectly formatted, gets names right. It's nothing like people have ever seen before. And so at that point, they're like, oh, shit, this is actually good, and it works way better than what I was expecting. So that's number one, but that's not enough yet. The next thing that happens within the first 1 to 2 days is people find what is one thing that they love using Wispr Flow for. For some people, like founders or people doing customer support or sales, it's emails. And they're like, I have 200 of these to get through every day. And with Wispr Flow, I do it in 2 hours instead of 4. This is one place where whenever I open my email, I'm going to have Wispr Flow. I'm going to use that for all of it. And so within a couple of days, you see people hook on to one workflow. And in data, it looks like they hit about a couple thousand words. And once they've hit that, it's usually revolving around 1 to 2 applications. And we know they've hit the second aha moment, which is, I found a place where this fits into my life. The third aha moment usually happens 2 to 3 weeks from that point, which is when they're in some other application and they get this insight, which is, why am I still using my keyboard? I love Wispr for this one thing, and there's no reason why I shouldn't use it in everything else. And that day, you see them go from 2 or 3 applications to using Flow in 20 or 30 applications. And
in general, the experience they describe it as is, I use my keyboard maybe 10% of the time, and I use Flow for the other 90%. And once somebody gets into that point, they're essentially a user for life. And what ends up happening is they organically go and they're like, I've never talked about any product online. I've never shared any product like this with my friends, but this has genuinely changed my life. This has changed how I interact with technology in a way that no other product ever has. And usually about 40% of the users who ever sign up get to phase 3. And then those users are our biggest advocates, biggest evangelists, all organic. And has been one of the reasons why Flow has gotten so viral over the last few months, is because of these 40% people for whom it's life-changing.
Yeah, it was life-changing for me. And like I said earlier, it was fascinating to me how much more productive I could be when I was less focused on producing with my fingers what was already in my mind, and I just needed to kind of let out. You mentioned earlier 0 edits.
Yes.
Right? That's your goal, is you want someone to be able to work with Wispr Flow, get what they need out, and not have to edit it.
Yeah.
What does that look like to you, and how close are you to that goal?
So this is a metric that we track quite effectively. For example, how long does somebody spend after they see what Wispr produced and pressing enter, which is essentially sending the message or starting a new thing. For people who get to that later point, that number drops down to half a second. They're not even reading what Flow writes most of the time, and they just press send immediately after, because that's the level of trust that they've built up. And the more you can hit the 0 edit, the bigger that trust gets. And the reason this is important is because this gets to a point where you fundamentally have a voice interface that people trust, and they don't need to look at a screen anymore for it. So it's building towards a truly immersive technology experience that lives in the background, so you as a person can be a lot more present. Now, what that looks like in terms of right now, where we are as a company on that path, is if you compare to Apple, Google, OpenAI, Wispr, the 0 edit rate is about 5%. So 5% of the messages that they produce are perfect, ready to go. With Wispr, it's about 90% in Slack and text messages, number of 0 edit messages. So 90% of the messages are sent without making a single change. For emails, it's about 60%. People have a more professional tone and such, and it varies. Email has a lot more variance than some of these other tools do, and people are more particular about how they sound. So that leads to a huge initiative for us this year, which is how do you make these systems adapt and learn from users? The way a lot of other tools do it, for example, like ChatGPT is something a lot of people are familiar with. And you do it there by going and adding a long custom prompt to it, by this is how I like, talk to me in short, brief sentences, don't go on rambles, My dad is never going to fill that out. My grandfather's never going to fill that out. That is used by a very small fraction of the entire human population. For most of them, they don't like settings. They don't like configurations. And with Wispr, we want to build it for the mass market. So a lot of what we're building right now is along those personalization lines. Okay, we put something out in your email. You make changes to it. What can we learn from that so that the next time around, Flow doesn't make that mistake again? From next time around, it doesn't make that mistake again, till a point where that 60% starts to trend higher and higher, because that is going towards our eventual goal of not just killing the keyboard, but also screens.
On one of my previous podcasts, I was chatting with Edward Fraser, and one of the things I talked about is I was trying to assess how I use the internet today. I think the internet's essentially dead. Why do I think the internet's dead? Because we don't use the open internet that much anymore. We use apps. And as I think more and more about that, what I realize is the next phase of how we learn to use, or how we use computers, is our interface. And I feel like we'll know when AGI gets here, when we spend a lot more time looking up, looking away from our phones. Experiencing the world and seeing, oh, there are things out here. I don't need to divert my attention to this device. This device integrates very cleanly and smoothly. When I think about what I do today, I carry around an incredibly powerful computer in my pocket. That whenever I need to use it, I interface with it, like you said, in the most inefficient ways. My fingers drive text in at maybe 8 bits a second. As fast as, like, not even that. My eyes interpret whatever it can put in front of me, but they still have to read it. Like, these are the most inefficient mediums to send and receive. How do you see us as people using devices in the near future?
The way I imagine kind of interaction with technology to really look and feel like is it should be something that is as natural to interact with as it is with other people. It is a system that understands you, maybe even better than you understand yourself. And it feels so seamless to interact with that it inherently becomes a part of your identity. This is what all of technology is going to move towards in the next few years, and that's what it's going to feel like. And the closest analogy to this is Jarvis, right, from Iron Man, where the thing that you notice about it is some very minute details that most people miss out on. Jarvis is not about the fact that, Tony Stark can talk to it and it gets it, but the fact that Iron Man doesn't have to give that many instructions to Jarvis, because Jarvis has a deep understanding of Tony. It has a deep memory. It has a deep level of context awareness. And so when we talk about AGI, right, I actually think that's focusing on the wrong problem, because AGI is purely focusing on, can you build a reasoning thing that can work? But the hard problem is, how do you give it that level of memory, that level of context awareness, and more than anything, that level of understanding of a single person? Because if you look at ChatGPT right now, right, every single interaction you have with it is completely new.
It's a clean slate.
It's a clean slate every single time. Yeah. And so this problem that I just talked about hasn't even been touched yet. And so that, to us, when I think about Wispr, that is what we're prioritizing. And the way we think about it is like, yeah, reasoning engines are going to be built and people are going to call this thing AGI. But the biggest thing to solve is, how do you make them work for people? And the fact that I can say that, hey, say no to this person, and it knows how I, for example, would say that to all the different people in my life, which is very different for every single person that I talk to. But there is no AI system in the world that is even this close to being able to do that.
Nor would you trust it.
Nor would I trust it.
I think being a representative of a human is a very difficult thing. And ChatGPT, for example, and several of the other chat-based tools, they have memory. But memory isn't context in the way that you were just describing it. How would you define, like, what is the context of a human?
Yeah. It is, I feel, so in times when I have tried to build memory into our systems, the one thing I learned, it is very hard to represent that in words. It is very representative in terms of examples, and what in just like neuroscience terms you would call episodic memory, right? My friend would know, or let's take the example of my partner, right? If she was texting on my behalf, she knows how I talk to my mom because she's seen me do that a bunch of times, and those things are in her memory. You can't put if you try to express all of that in words, it's going to be really, really hard, because there is a lot of context around it that gets missed out as well. And so you fundamentally have to think about it in a very different way. And I think the way, people look at RAG, like retrieval augmented generation, where you put in some past messages, drop that in. The way you look at memory, where it saves some short snippets that I might use later on as like facts about you. That is a very rudimentary version of what this could look like. It is like at the point of, the first wheel being invented, and from that to like actually having a vehicle you can drive. And there needs to be a lot more work there to actually embed that depth of information about different aspects of a person to be able to do the right thing.
I think it's also fascinating because when there's enough context, or when something or someone has enough context about a person, that person feels understood.
Yeah.
Think about whenever you've met a dignitary. I don't know if you've ever met like a government official, like high-ranking person, or someone who has time constraints. What do their handlers typically do? they give them a little note card with a few notes about you, and they try to remember your name, where you're from, and they try to do something to kind of establish context. How do we know each other? But when there's a power dynamic or there's someone that's important, you kind of are uncritical of how much they know, because you just feel it's nice that they took time to know you. But when it comes to something that's very, very personal, it matters a lot. How much does it know me? Does it understand me? What are some of the things that you think are important, or that maybe you do now in Wispr Flow, or that you're going to do to help give that feedback back to the user so that they know they're understood?
That's actually a great question. It goes to a lot of what we think of as the core mission for the company. And what I feel is one of the most important emotions for people to feel is the feeling of being understood. You know, when we see people interact with Flow, right, and say it bugs out, for a lot of other software, you'd be like, this thing stopped working. You would say, oh, the software crashed, or I did something wrong. When Flow gets something wrong, people started saying, Flow didn't understand me. Flow missed what I said. Flow lost my whatever, or like Flow really got the names of the people I care about. And so in people's head, they're already personifying Flow, which is a very unique behavior that I hadn't seen happen with most other software that's ever been built out there. And people think of Flow as in terms of like status wise, I would say a bit lower, pretty much like your assistant, like a secretary, a protege, something like that, that is there to help you. And that gets us to, okay, if you have an assistant, if you have an intern, and you want the person to feel very understood by the intern, you want the person to respect this intern person, what would they need? And so like the first thing you need for that intern is you need the person to be competent, right? Don't make really stupid mistakes. Second thing you need is you need to make the person feel understood. And so I'll talk about ways in which we do that. And the third thing is you need to be reliable. And so we're essentially with Flow building a human personality because we need to, because that's how people perceive it. And essentially it's breaking it down, and that gets to every single aspect of Flow, down to like, how does the notification sound, the content of it, the tone of it, as somebody from whom we want the user to respect it, but also we want to show these different characteristics of Flow to that person. And ways in which you make people feel understood is some small things that you do. For example, learning from your mistakes or learning about user preferences. Not just that, but letting them know about it. So for example, all voice dictation systems get the name of my brother wrong. And so with Flow, one thing that we built that actually is maybe my favorite feature of all time is if I fix a mistake that Flow made, it immediately tells me, hey, added this new word to your dictionary. And it's like, oh, cool. Like you saw you made a mistake. You saw me fix the mistake. And without saying anything else, you're like, got you. I'll take care of this.
I saw it do that. Yeah. It's great.
Yeah.
And even lets you like stop it if it misunderstood.
Yes. It lets you stop it. And so it's like a lot of systems have like added this to dictionary and you have to go manually add it. That doesn't feel that special. Some systems like ChatGPT like tries to add things to memory by itself. That doesn't feel special. But it's like, hey, figure out this is important to you. I'm going to tell you that I think this is important to you and give you some control over that as well. That is what then starts to feel really magical. And it's a sneak peek of what we're going to be building for the remainder of this year.
And you mentioned reliability as well.
Yeah.
How important is reliability to you? Because like I mentioned earlier, you picked a very tough position to be in, which is the final line between the person and the machine. So how do you talk to your team about reliability and the importance of being available for the user at all times?
A lot of it is by example, right? I respond to customer support tickets for a few hours every single week. talk to the users, be it on like Slack, all of these different channels. A lot of times I personally go in and jump into these bugs. So that shows to the team that it is an extremely important thing for us to be very receptive of that. If somebody feels a feeling of being frustrated, they feel a feeling of loss because of like, they like spoke their heart out to Flow for 2 minutes and it just lost what they said. Like, that is a horrible feeling. No one should have to feel that. Those things are prioritized, and we communicate to the user like, hey, got this. This just absolutely sucks. I would hate for this to happen to me. I'm going to go fix this right now so this never happens to you. And I'm just really, really sorry. And people are, I would say 99% of people are accepting of mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes. But the thing is how you respond to it. And so what I described by me doing it and by kind of me and my co-founder being very focused on it, it drives that culture in the team. And that gave us the idea of what if we could drive that culture into Flow and Flow's interactions. So if, for example, Flow misses something, how does it communicate to the user like, hey, like, super sorry this happened for you. We've saved this thing here, so you can go retry this if you want. We haven't lost it, but like totally understand this is like frustrating. And we've like told our team we'll like fix it next time. So having very empathetic messaging is important. That goes into a lot of the way we specifically design those features as well. Because just like an intern, like when the person makes mistakes, you want them to just accept the mistake. You want them to be able to kind of just like not leave you hanging and give you kind of like recourse. Like, I'll go fix this thing, or just like, yeah, like wrote 90% of this thing, but maybe you want to fix a little bit of it. And this is in contrast to, and the reason I specifically mentioned how important this is because of how rare this is. Like, Siri's been around for the last, 15 years now?
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, I didn't get that. You hear this so often when you try to ask it something, or like, I'm sorry, I don't know how to do this thing. And you're like, I just lost the thing that you, at least like, give me something.
Yeah, it's like, are you really sorry?
Yeah.
Or are you just saying that? You know,
yeah.
it loses its, the tractability of the answer. You don't believe it.
Yeah. Imagine like you tell your intern to like get a coffee. I'm like, can't get a coffee. It's just like, or they don't even tell you. They're just like, disappear.
I don't know how to do that.
Yeah, exactly.
So what do you mean? Like, okay, well, Google it.
Yeah, just do something, figure out a way. And so when we're thinking about Flow and the ways in which we would interact and getting to a point where we're making it take actions is a really big part. How do you handle the failures when you can't do something? Because that is just a necessary thing that is going to happen, right? People are going to expect a lot of you, and you may not be able to match that. How do you make people still feel good about it without just like leaving them hanging?
You mentioned personification of AIs. In a previous episode, I had talked about, when you look at how people design walkways, mm-hmm. and you've been on college campuses, you see there's walkways that are nice and paved, and you see there's walkways that have evolved, where people walk through the grass, and you see a very trodden pathway. I feel like whether intentionally or not, we are personifying AIs. And I think as we move more and more towards agentic implementations of modern AI, mm-hmm. Eventually it's going to be difficult to distinguish whether you are talking to a real human or whether an agent is completely handling something. Yeah. How does that change how you build software? Because you are building software, and eventually that it's going to manifest as something that feels like an agent. Mm-hmm. So is it like raising a child?
It is in a lot of ways like raising a child. I don't have kids, so like what do I know about raising children? But the way I think about it is,
or is it? I guess is it more like training a human? Like at what point do you stop building software?
Yeah.
And do you realize you're actually making an entity?
I think you are always making an entity. Like, writing software is a means to an end. That's not an end. The end is building this entity that people trust and people respect. Respect is a very important part of trust, and we can dive into that as well, because I think that's also one thing that very few people talk about when they're building these systems, is building self-respect into these systems themselves. And that is, I think, what you're doing at the end of the day. And there's this one talk by Rahul Vora, the CEO of Superhuman, where he talks about applying game design principles to software design and how, at the end of the day, everything is about human emotions. Every feature, every bug, every word that your messaging has to users evokes emotions. And if you choose what emotions you want to evoke, that makes everything really powerful. And I feel the same way about software and all now. It's very emotion driven. So inherently it's about the personification of it and how do you build this entity and design the personality. And the rest of the software just goes and builds the blocks to actually get there.
It's underrated how much people emotionally react to the product they're using. And it's a big difference between things like consumer apps and enterprise software, where enterprise software is more focused on getting the job done versus consumer apps. They tend to focus a bit more on the ergonomics of the tool because that's a retention mechanism. You guys are playing in a space where you appeal to the average consumer because what your tool is doing is what everyone does. No one today uses a computer unless they're using a specific setup without using a keyboard, without entering text. But anyone can use it. So why is it that that it matters so much how the user feels when they're using your tool, even if they're focused on the outcome, which is I want it to sound like me?
I think humans are just emotional creatures.
Because they get angry.
They get angry. They get happy. They feel so many different emotions. And there's an argument that human beings are very rational creatures. I think humans are inherently irrational. Humans are very emotionally and subjectively driven, and we tell ourselves stories to then convince us that the reason we did things was for very strong logical reasons. And I don't think I think that's a great facade that people have. But inherently, once you accept the fact that humans make decisions emotionally, that's when you start to really unlock the magic. And once you start to think about that in your sales, in your software design, in your marketing videos, what emotions are you trying to really hit with this? What level of relatability are you going for? That's when you see the most iconic products, the most iconic brands, the most iconic ads you remember. They all are just emotional experiences you have.
When you're talking to people to join your team, how do you discern if they have an understanding of the importance of delighting users and evoking that positive emotion? What do you talk about with them?
So there's two things we do actually. The first thing that helps me suss it out in the first 5 minutes of conversation is I tell them to tell me about one of the favorite products that they have. And the way they describe it tells me a lot about what they care about and things that they notice. For somebody who cares about the nuances of product design, they have these things off the top of my head. They will tell you the smallest details. One person was geeking out to me about how hard it was for Apple to optimize the strength of the magnets in the AirPods case. So it's easy to open with one thumb. It is extremely satisfying to fiddle with this thing around all the time. And it just gives you so much delight. Every time I close this thing, I hear the snap sound and I feel so happy. And somebody spent a year probably building this thing, and just hearing one of these engineers geek out about that, I'm like, you care about these kinds of things because you know what it takes to build this level and you can identify it. So that's a huge one. And then what we do after that is throughout the challenges that we have, there is always a lot of open room for them to really have themselves shine in how people feel. So the best engineers that we've hired, what they do with our take-home challenge is they go build the thing, then they show it to their friends, they get their friends' reactions, then they improve it, and then they tell me why they made certain changes, because that's how they saw people reacting to their software. And you just want to see that with people you bring on board.
Yeah, it's hard to find because it takes a lot of empathy, like you mentioned earlier, to figure out like, how are people going to feel when they touch this? What is that experience going to be like? I mean, for me, one of the most exciting things when I started using Wispr Flow was I just felt it immediately allowed me to focus on what I needed to get done and eliminate the noise and stay and work in flow.
Yeah.
I could get an idea out and then I could put it into a Google Doc, or I could drop it into ChatGPT or something and then play around with it some more. But it was so satisfying to stay in the moment of making what I was making. Tell me a bit about your perspective on flow and how important it is in the creative process and in the building process. Because I think being creative and building diverge at some points.
This part of it, so this is a very, like when we put it there, it was just like, okay, this makes sense, right? It's very obvious. But nobody has ever tried to solve this problem before, which shows you how non-obvious this is. When we initially built Flow, right, what we did was we actually just sat beside people and I was like, do your thing. I just want to stare at you work. And across our team, we did this for like 100 people, right? And you're like looking at these people work and like initially they're a little conscious and they get into their zone and they forget you're there. I saw like they're tapping an email and they're just like trying to find the right word. And by the time they're done, I was like, shit, what was I going to say? Or they're like trying to find where to perfectly place the right comma. Or they're like in the flow working really fast, but you see them misspell a word, then they go back and try to correct the word. And then they're typing half as slow because they lost their train of thought. And these are 3 examples, but there's so many more that we saw. And that got us to like, okay, these are all the challenges that are coming up. How can we go and solve it? Which is where the idea for Flow came up in the first place when we saw people do these things on their computers. And then that's where we were like, okay, let's try this hypothesis. What if we don't show anything to people? They don't have to think about what the final thing's going to be like. They can just focus on just putting everything in their mind out. And then we'll do a good job of presenting them something that they can comprehend, that they feel proud about, that they feel understood with, like, oh, I was saying a list of 5 things. You actually made it into bullets. I didn't tell you to. That's amazing. Those small things really ended up mattering to people. And that is still very much like how we build any new feature. At Wispr is like, okay, show me your flow. Like the most recent thing we've been seeing is there are hundreds of millions of people in the world where what they do is they're writing an email, for example, then they go paste it into ChatGPT, then they talk to it for 10 minutes and they copy paste it back. And that is honestly the most primitive way to use a large language model. And that to me is ridiculous. So and this is again, me staring a lot at people doing their thing. But
I used to do that until I got Flow. I did.
So many people still do that. And so the thing that top of mind is like, okay, how do we build and improve this experience, right? And this actually then starts the process for us where we build and iterate. And it's probably going to take 50 individual iterations for us to get to an experience where I'm like, this is right. And this hits all the spots. This is just as intuitive. I can give this to my grandfather and he'll be able to use this really well. That's when we would launch that feature. And that's kind of how we go and build everything.
I have to say, one of my biggest frustrations is when I move from my Mac, working, getting something done, to my mobile phone and I don't have Flow. Because I then have to change again how I work with whatever interface I'm playing, or if I start an email on my Mac and then I go and make lunch and then I sit down as a meeting lunch, I want to work on this. It's like, wow, I feel like I now have to mode switch back into the old, less nice way of doing things when I don't have Flow. And that's what kind of indicated to me, this is something that's really reshaping how I work.
Yeah.
When you think about changing someone's workflow, what do you want someone to get out of their use of Wispr Flow? Like if you could describe like, this is how I want to change someone's life. this is how I want to change someone's workflow. How would you describe that in the most ideal sense?
It's just really simple. They have more time to do the things that they want to do. And that is just like what I think is right. Like if somebody, for example, is doing customer support and they're like, do you want to spend 8 hours of your day replying to people in their inbox? Like if you do, great. Like you don't have to use Flow. I don't care. But if you don't, you would rather do like more important things, spend time with your family, upskill yourself and all, and if this thing saves you time, like this is the tool for you. And I would really want you to go build that behavior. And so that is all I want at the end of the day, is for people to have time to do the things they want.
And as Wispr Flow builds, and as you start working, or as you start thinking about what you're going to build in the next 3, 6, 12 months,
yeah,
how much more are you going to start doing for users? Because with the right information from the user, you can not only know what they want, but you can project their intent across apps. Mm-hmm. How do you see yourself getting deeper into users' daily workflows?
So the way we think about it is, it's all, again, in terms of building habits and maximizing the value that Flow adds. So we started off with building the one thing that people use 100 times a day. Mm-hmm. Then we're going to build the 10 things that people use 10 times a day. And then we're going to build 100 things that people use once a day. And that is how we kind of think about all of the products that we build. Like, what is the next most frequent workflow that people have that is insanely painful that they would rather not do? And it makes a lot of sense for us to do with Flow. Because the thing that we really have with Flow, right, is on the surface, it looks like a very sleek voice dictation platform, which is it, works fantastically. But what we actually built as the foundation for that is an overlay that lives on the system level and has access to what you're doing across every single application and is able to use that context to help you do things a lot better. So now that we have this foundation, we can do a lot more for users across their different workflows. That's the thing I'm most excited about.
Me too.
Yeah.
In the most simple terms, because we talked about dictation tools, we talked about workflow tools, having people do better work. What is Wispr AI building, and why does it matter to anyone in the world? Why does it matter?
We're building the new interface for the new internet. The way we're using our computers, the way we're using technology in general, is going through a fundamental change. The mice, the keyboard, screens, the operating systems that have existed till now made a lot of sense for the ways in which we were using it. But in the last 2 years, since everything is changing with AI, the biggest thing is computers can understand natural language. They have the ability to reason. The current ways in which we work don't make sense at all anymore. So when we recraft out what that user journey is going to look like in their daily lives, it needs a new way to think, and we don't want to wait around until somebody builds something. I just want to make sure we're able to build that experience in the most delightful way for people that's very user aligned. And that's the entire reason why this company exists, the entire reason why I'm spending a better part of my 20s working on this than doing anything else that I could possibly be doing. And the reason why I wake up every morning.
What's different now versus 2 years ago versus 5 years ago? Because you mentioned the proliferation of new technologies, and we don't need to name all of them because a lot of them have come out, and a lot of them are well known. But what is it about the change from half a decade ago to just 2 years ago that has made you so confident that this is the time and this is the place for you to spend your time? Or this is the moment,
There are two reasons. I'll talk about the less important one first and the most important one after. The less important one is the fact that there are language models, AI tools, all of these that exist now that can understand language, that can reason, and that can start to do things on your behalf. The more important thing is the mass market is using it. It is very rare, in history, and you can point, you can count on like the fingers of your two hands, how many times it happens that the entire world starts adopting a new piece of technology. This has started happening now, which to me is like, this has crossed the chasm. This is at a point where this is not a Silicon Valley problem. This is not like the top 1% of the world problem. This is a human problem and a shift in how human society works, where this is now one of the most pressing things in my mind to solve if we are building for a world that we want to see be aligned with technology. Because the failure mode of there not being a good interface for people and artificial intelligence to work together is that AI starts to replace people because they don't know how to work well with it. Mm-hmm. That's not what you want. You want all of the improvements that are happening here to make you smarter, to make you better. And the only way that happens is if you can interface with it a lot more.
I completely agree with that. And I think it's part of the challenge of talking about this in common vernacular is, you and I are talking about how the fact that we're standing on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah.
This technology, to people that understand it, has unlocked our ability to look even further and set the sights higher.
Yeah.
But it presents itself as a personified kind of pseudo replacement for humans.
Yeah.
But when you look at technologies when they get adopted, when people understand what they are and what they can do, they turn into an amplifier. And when we start looking at how companies are going to be built in the future, I think we're going to have a couple of moments where we're going to realize why this makes sense. I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
When we put a human on the moon, NASA had a lot of computers, but they weren't physical computers. They were people.
They were people.
They were skilled mathematicians that had the title of computer. Why? Because their job was to do repetitive, highly difficult mathematical equations to do projections. But that job went away. I think a lot of jobs are going to go away because that's not the ultimate place where the human needs to be.
Yeah.
That highly repetitive work is best put somewhere, put on something that can do it, and then that can free up the people to think better and to think about higher level problems. Where do you think we're going to see that in technology?
The biggest drive that I'm seeing right now, and this is one that I just very strongly believe in, and I'm a huge supporter for, is the tools that are coming up that let you build software with natural language. I started building software when I was 10 years old, and to me, it was one of the most powerful things because you can dream of something. You can decide to do a task, and then you can spend 10 minutes writing code to do something that would otherwise have taken me as a person months to do otherwise. And that has now, for example, become democratized. A lot of people are saying engineers are going to lose their jobs because they were the ones who essentially had the power to go and build this software.
They could speak to the machine.
They could speak to the machine, and now everyone can. Everybody in the company, whatever small thing they need to build, they can just actually go build it today. And there's fantastic tools like Replit or V0 by Vercel or what like Cursor and all of these other tools are doing. And it's absolutely fantastic. And yeah, a lot of engineers are going to lose their jobs. Like me personally, like I've probably written more code than I've spoken English or any verbal language in my life.
Yeah.
Like that's how close it is to me. And now 80% of my engineering is natural language based. Like, so that to me was the big point. I was like, okay, I thought I was like a pretty good programmer, but if this can make me even better than what I thought was like peak performance, then that's something really special. And imagine what it can do to people who were otherwise at just ground zero and could not code, and they have the ability to now go build things. So that's going to happen. Question is like, is it bad that a lot of engineers are going to lose their jobs and they need to find something else? Like, yeah, I feel bad for all the college grads coming out right now with computer science degrees into this world that is very different than the world that they entered college in 4 years ago, where it was a good idea to still study computer science. But on the bright side, instead of a few 100 million people, there's 8 billion people now who can build software. And that is, I think, what technology usually does. And there's these hiccups that come along the way. But I feel it's just a necessary part of evolution.
I have a lot of opinions on this, and I love the way you framed it. First of all, I love Replit.
Yeah.
And I use it, and I only use the agents in natural language. And I can code. I've got a computer science degree, and I love writing code, but I'm trying to challenge myself to think differently.
Yeah.
I wrote my first program on a graphing calculator. And I did it because I hated doing vector math.
Yeah.
And I made an agreement with my physics professor. If I showed him that I wrote the program to do all of this vector math, could I use the calculator on tests? And he said, absolutely. Well, that was great for me, but then all of a sudden my classmates are wondering, how is he getting this done so quick? And they started asking me for the program. It's like, well, as soon as I started sharing it with them, I started realizing they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah.
They were just punching the numbers in and they were moving on. Now, is that bad? Now, I'm not quite sure. Is it important when you're studying physics to understand how to do a physics equation or to understand physics?
Yeah. You know, I've been talking to a lot of new grads, people I mentor, graduating from college now, like looking to enter the workforce in the next few months. And the reason I mentioned this earlier, is top of mind, is there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear that, what did I just spend the last 4 years of my life studying? Why does it matter if I know the syntax of this thing or not? Like, are my skills just useless? And the thing that I tell them, the thing that I have always thought and continue to think is the most important skill that you need as an engineer, and like what truly being an engineer means, is you have the ability to take a big complex problem and then divvy it up into smaller tasks, know how to stage those tasks, and then if you can do those tasks or not, it doesn't matter. If you use whatever tool you want to go like build these things out, none of that matters. But figuring out what that complex task is, how do you break it down, that is the most important skill. And that is, I think, one of the things that, because of these tools right now, this is like the negative consequence that you see. People are stopping to do that. And I saw this happen with a couple of people that I was kind of seeing work as well. Instead of trying to do that, they just try to give the whole problem to one of these AI systems. And again, you're not giving enough context, you're not giving enough details to exactly what you want. And then it just produces shit. And you're like, why? And then you keep trying to debug it with it. Instead of just being like, let me do this part of it myself. Let me not be lazy about this part. And then what these tools are really good at is doing these small things that I tell them, that each are like small things you go fix. Anybody can do that. But this is the big part is the most important thing as a skill that you need to build as an engineer. I think if you do that, you never need to worry about not having a job, because that skill is one of the most precious skills that people need.
One of the things that, when you go back to talking about dictation tools, a lot of users have experience with them, and they play in all these different environments. Some users swear by them, while other users refuse to give up their keyboards.
Yeah.
How do you view the divide, and how are you working to bring users that don't want to give up their keyboards or had a bad experience with dictation tools? What's your message to them, and how are you leading the company to kind of serve those users that may have been underserved, may have had a bad experience, and are unwilling to trust tools like yours?
I would say people who love voice dictation and people who like religiously love their keyboards are an extremely small fraction of the human population. Let's say like sub 5%. 95% of the world lives in this place where it's like, I don't know any better. This is the thing that I've been using and my dad used and my grandfather used and we've all been using for the last like 3 generations in my family. And I tried this voice thing once and it kind of sucked, and Siri sucked, and it's kind of annoying, so I don't want to do it. Everything I think about is focused on this 95% of the population. These are people who don't know any better, but there is better. What I found for us is actually, it's very interesting. For some companies, there is a lot of demand. People have a problem, they're looking for a solution. For some companies, people don't know that is a problem. And so you first need to educate them about that and then show them the solution. What we found works best is when there is somebody who already uses Wispr, they go and they say to the world like, hey, this is a thing. I love using it. This is actually better than the other systems you might have tried out. And it helps me get my job done so much better. That sparks people's creativity and it opens their mind up to trying something new. And we literally saw this happen in the studio when you were telling one of the sound engineers like, hey, this is like Wispr is fantastic. He was like, oh, how does it differ from Dragon? And it's like, oh, it's like incompatible. It like gets all these mistakes right insanely fast, all of that. And he's probably now curious and he'll probably go check it out later today because like, okay, you dispel the myth that this is going to be similar to an experience that I've had before and it's going to be better. And so what we do as a company in our marketing is just take all the users that are like you and put them up on the stage to share their message with the world. Because it matters a lot more what they have to say than what I can sell about my own company because of course I'm biased.
Yeah. Well, when you started getting deep into the challenge of building Wispr Flow, what was the problem that you thought would be easy that ended up being really hard?
It is painfully hard to deliver on that zero edit message and really like understand what people mean, right? And the reason is human rambles. Like if you, for some users who actually decide to share their data with us to improve the models, we read through them and it's like, what this person said is like completely incomprehensible gibberish. Like, I don't even know what this thing means or what this is supposed to do. So we did this this thing at the office recently where we just took some of these messages that people had, and all of us on the team had to write down what a formatted version of this message would be that the user likely wanted, and it was all different. And that's just like, when I say that, like your eyes go up because it's like all different. It's like, yeah, this is just like super strange. And then you're like trying to solve this problem and giving something to like what people want. It requires so much contextual understanding, and like I do this a lot as well. Like I'm like, hey, can you look at this this thing, the thing that I was talking about earlier, like what's that word? I don't know. Anyway, let's like move on. This is how I talk, and like in conversation it seems normal, but imagine having this like written down and you're just like, I have no idea what this like 70-word sentence is going on about.
Oh yeah. I think the most exciting thing about tools like large language models is they've shown us they can kind of understand what you mean. But that understanding also, I don't know what your opinion on this is, but when you think about what a large language model is, it really is just guessing. Kind of like a lossy compression. And at the same time, they're getting really good at figuring out what you're trying to say. So what happens what do you think will happen when models start to get good at predicting what you're going to say, and they start being able to work and infer what you want faster than you can say it?
I feel there needs to be a lot more work in that. And like going back to this example that I just gave you, right?
Yeah.
This is the reason why for all the other models out there, their zero edit rates are 5%. And that is the challenge that we had to solve. And imagine going from that gibberish to getting to a 90% of your messages are perfect when they get out is the hard thing we had to solve while getting there. And getting there gets us to the next point where you can start to be more proactive to people, right? You have 200 emails. You probably, based on what you've said before, Flow might know what you might just say to more than half of them. And it can pre-fill that for you so you don't have to repeat yourself again and again. And that again comes to me about what are things that you could do for people that let them do what they want a lot more than spend time in doing rote work that they don't feel that inspired about. And so I think that's where a lot of the proactivity is going to help. The thing to keep in mind is you don't start to impede into things that people actually find delightful. And I think that ends up being more of a user self-selecting thing. So I at least right now think that's less of a worry that we need to have. And more so just, let's put this out there. Let's start to do things for people. Respect their preferences if they want like things done a little differently, things not being done at all. So there's going to be a little back and forth because not everybody at this moment is going to be comfortable with, somebody else doing all their work for them. But I think that's also going to be a change in human behavior that we see, where you're just going to be a little more comfortable with that, a little more comfortable with things being proactive. And to some degree, like people have been trying to build this for the longest time. This was what Microsoft's Clippy was like 20 years ago. And they were trying to do that. Now, of course, like this thing wasn't the most intelligent thing. Could say it was like kind of good for the time when it came out. But I think like in the next year or so, something like that is very viable. And I think it could be a huge unlock to people.
Well, you said a phrase that I really liked, which is people do all their work.
Yeah.
What is work? Like what work are people doing? Because if you're finding that people bring Wispr Flow into their workflows and they happen much faster, what is the work people are really doing? And how do we help people see that they can define themselves by more of what they can get done versus what they're doing?
That's actually a really good point. It reminds me of this, I forget the name of the guy. He wrote this new book called Slow Productivity. Do you know the name of the author?
I do not know the name of the author.
He's written a couple of other fantastic books as well, including Deep Work. And it was all about there's so much focus today in society about people measuring themselves by like, I did 8 hours of work. I responded to 500 emails and like, you measure it with that. And that is inherently true for information workers, people who are especially working in managerial roles, people who are working in like consulting and so on, because it is very hard to see the fruits of your labor. Like in a lot of other roles, it's actually easier. Like if you're a farmer, like you don't care if you're spending 10, 12 hours a day or not. You care if your crops grow at the end of the year and you can go sell them for a good price and they don't rot away. But with these roles, it's hard to see impact because so many layers of bureaucracy come in. The actual tangible value is very far away. You can't really attribute it back to the person. So people need some way to figure out, am I doing enough? Am I doing a good job? I don't know. If I just work 2 hours a day, but I still get a lot done, is that a good thing? Am I not work? Am I lazy? And I don't personally have a strong view on that, and I'm also at times in that boat as well. After long days of work, like work 18 hours, then I'm just like sitting on my dining table and being like, did I do enough today? Do I need to do more, or can I just go sleep now? And sometimes there's not a good answer to that question.
Yeah, I think when we talk about the abundance that AI is going to bring, I think it will be around that nexus of how do we make sure that people are productive, not just doing work. And when we look at businesses, I have this metric that I like to judge business by, and this is easier done with publicly traded companies, but just take the amount of revenue a company brings in and divide it by the number of employees.
Yeah.
That'll tell you where the rocket ships are.
Did you, by the way, see the new Replit integration we built into Flow?
I did not.
So
when did you guys release it?
2 days ago.
Okay, so
on Wednesday we did a big launch.
Yeah, for
Windows, and part of it was also announcing our partnership with Replit, where what you could do is, so you're having a conversation with somebody and was like, oh, you know what? If we can build an app that did this, it would be fantastic. You just highlight it and then you say, Flow built an app for this. That's it. You don't have to leave your place, whatever. It can just go do that. I did it recently where I was like typing out tweets and actually, hey, Flow, can you make a thing that makes my tweets more viral? And then it was going and building an app in the background while I was doing my thing, and then it was ready by the time I was done.
That's incredible.
So this I find is like one of the most powerful tools that we built in, and it pushes forward more of where I think software is going more in the space of, instead of having apps that you select and download beforehand, is going to be a lot of contextual applications that are built on the spot for the thing you need to do. Then they get spun off, doesn't matter, to do all the little one-off things that come up in your life all day long.
I'm just curious, what is the most memorable piece of feedback that you got from a user that's using Wispr Flow, and how did it change what you're guiding the team to build?
So this is a really interesting thing that came out some time back. And this was by Rajiv, who was the CEO of Product Hunt. And he started using Flow organically, then reached out to me because he loved the tool. And the thing he said that really stuck with me was, Flow has actually changed how I think and how I articulate by making me go directly from my thoughts to something that is there in front of me. I structure my thoughts differently, and I am more thoughtful when I am saying things. And that was interesting because that starts to hint towards this being a tool that helps people think better, that helps people think more clearly. And this is an emergent behavior as people use the tool more, on essentially them learning how to use the tool better, the same way you learn how to use the keyboard better as you use it. And so you're starting to see that. And then the thing is, we do the opposite of what the keyboard did, right? The keyboard tried to make people slower by pushing things around so it doesn't get jammed. We don't have those limitations. What can we do to make people think even better? What are tools for expressing yourself that we can build into Flow? And the result of this is going to be things that we build in that people are not going to be identifying like, this thing helps me think better. What they're going to identify it is, I just do work much better when I use Flow. This thing is delightful. It's so seamless. I don't have to edit anything. Like, my team likes my messaging a lot more. And those are the results that people are going to see. But that really happens if you are able to communicate a lot better. And that is something that I think very few software products in the world, or anything in the world, really has the ability to do, is shape someone's thought process, which I think is magical.
That is magical. It had a similar impact on me. I mean, that's why I reached out to you. It was, I found that this was an unlock.
Yeah.
And I've been in software for 30 years.
Yeah.
When you see something special, you really know. And like I said, it makes my top 10. Fascinating. When you think about, we talked about easy problems that ended up being hard when you're building. What's a hard problem that ended up being really easy for you all?
We thought it's going to be very challenging to get people to install a software on their computer that's pretty much like running in the background. And that can go and write into every application. But especially the world is very privacy sensitive. People care a lot about their data. The thing we learned is it's actually very easy to solve. The way you do it is don't do shady stuff and just be very transparent with people. And so with Flow, the way we solved it is essentially just had very clear messaging, like, hey, we need your mic for this thing. We need this thing so that we can paste into any application. And if you don't want us to do like particular parts of it, you can turn these things off in the settings if you care about that privacy. But here's why we need these things, and like we really care about privacy. And so during the first few seconds of interaction with the product, people start to feel that trust. And you actually have about only 1 to 2% of the users drop off at that stage where they're giving us kind of system level permission to do things on their behalf on their computer. So that I think is maybe one of the lowest drop off points that we were expecting at all in the product overall, compared to what I had seen in a lot of other companies before on what just, funnels look like.
So we spent a lot of time here talking about input and interface for input. How do you see output changing?
A lot of people with Wispr would ask us, why don't we build text to speech inside Wispr so that it can talk back to you? And this comes up very often, and a lot of people think that is the future of systems talking back to you, and that is what it should really feel like. I think that's a very wrong assumption to make, because it's not grounded in real hard facts, which is when you're consuming information, your eyes can do it so much faster than your ears even can. And when you're looking at consuming visual content, when you are talking about discovery, when you're talking about consuming a large volume of, say, like textual or structured information, your eyes are the best way to do that. So we're not going to see displays die. That's why whenever I talk about it, I talk about going from display first to voice first interfaces, not completely killing the screens, because they're very useful for a certain set of tasks. And so if we're like drawing out this world here, like what you need is a voice interface, because language is a common input modality. What you need is a display interface to be able to receive information in a very high bandwidth fashion. And what you need is the ability to then also put in more nonverbal cues. And that could come from like facial microexpression, could also be gestures you make with your eyes and being able to capture that to do more spatial work overall. And those, to me, from first principles, are like the three building blocks that you need. One incarnation of that is wearable glasses. 50% of the human population wears glasses, so it's not too far off from what people are used to. You have a display on them. You have the ability for them to capture audio really well, give audio back to you. And then some more sensing technology that lets you capture gestures, expressions, all of that. That, to me, is a full, complete system. And I would say I would actually go as far to say I'm like extremely confident that that is what we're going to be using 5 years from now. And you're going to see that have a huge explosion in the Silicon Valley first.
Yeah.
As we proceed, and a few years after that in the rest of the world, it would start to get more common. In the same way, we used to carry laptops with us everywhere. Then when phones came, you started leaving your laptop at home and carrying your phones around. Now, when these would come, you would carry your phones around a lot lesser, because you're going to be able to do almost everything you can do with these devices. This is going to be your portable thing you carry everywhere. And you might just leave your phones at home, and they may look different, be much bigger, because you would primarily use it for more content consumption-y things, like why else would you need a big screen? And that is just going to be a really, really exciting leap forward.
One piece of advice you would give yourself before you started Wispr AI?
To not take things too seriously. I think life is stressful. There's things that don't go your way every time, like every day, multiple times a day. And as somebody who keeps striving for the best, that was something that I just didn't accept. And there was a part of my younger self who was like, no, I can make everything perfect, and really strive towards that. But what ends up happening is you try to spend a lot of your mental energy on that last like 5% that you don't have control over, and that just shoots you in the foot. So that's been something that I've started to personally adopt a lot over the last year or so. Just makes me so much happier. There's things that are in your control, there's things that are not, and you just like shrug your shoulders and go to the next thing.
And as you came to that sort of perspective, like how much of that was influenced by previous startups or previous companies you had worked at, versus how much do you just figure out by being introspective and looking at the past objectively?
So this specific one was just purely on Wispr, because I think this was one where everything always moved for us at a really fast pace. And so in a single day, I would be going from like extremely ecstatic to just like a terrible thing happens, and then back and forth every single hour. And there was just no way to sustain that level of emotional variation without needing to just have a different outlook on life. And I feel like that, at least to that like emotional or mental degree, I wasn't challenged before this company.
You seem like someone that loves challenges, and that and once you find something you love, it's impossible to get you off of it. What advice would you give to aspiring founders, or many of these new grads that might decide, hey, I listened to Tanay and he told me that maybe now's the time. What advice would you give them about just starting their own thing or embracing the uncertainty of building from nothing?
I think there's a lot of people who think that the job as a founder of your own company is glorious. And I think like that's just what it looks like on the surface. What being a founder is about is like, there's a lot of it where you are alone, figuring things out by yourself. It's painful. You get the highest highs, the lowest lows, and it really challenges you the most to an emotional and mental level. So that is something that, the way I always think about it is like, everybody decides their own paths. I wouldn't say being a founder is the best idea for anybody. Like if this is right for you, then you go do that. But the thing I do wanna share with people, like what it looks like to be on this side, so that they can go make their own decisions for themselves. That is a conversation for another time.
I'd love to understand from your perspective, like how would you describe the mission of Wispr AI to someone that's never heard of the company, but may be interested in knowing what you guys do?
We're building the most effective way for people to communicate with other people and with technology. And if we succeed at that, I think that's a life well spent.
When you succeed.
When we succeed at that.